I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. What I'm about to tell you will shock you, but I promise by the end you'll see why I had no choice but to do what I did. On New Year's Eve, standing in my freezing living room wearing 2 coats. Because I couldn't afford to fix my broken furnace, my daughter asked me a question that would unravel 7 months of lies. Mom, do you like the 1965 Ford Mustang that Jordan gave you? I felt my hands go numb, not from the cold this time, but from shock. What Mustang? I whispered. She had no idea her husband had been stealing from me for months. She had no idea I'd been living on donated soup while he vacationed in the Bahamas with my money. And she definitely had no idea that I was about to prove every single one of his lies with receipts. My name is Daisy Brooks. I'm 68 years old, a retired math teacher and a widow. For 7 months I lived in poverty while my son-in-law convinced everyone, including my own daughter, that he was taking care of me. This is the story of how I fought back. The champagne bottle caught the dim light from my kitchen window. Expensive French, the kind of thing I hadn't bought in the 68 years I'd been alive. My daughter Everly set it on the counter with a soft thud, snowflakes melting from her wool coat onto the worn linoleum. Behind her, Jordan stamped his Italian leather shoes on my doormat. His breath clouded in the frigid air that followed them inside like an unwelcome guest. Mom, Everly said, her smile bright but somehow hollow. Happy New Year. I'd been sitting alone for 3 hours watching fireworks bloom over downtown Portland through frost-edged windows. The soup I'd heated, donated from the church pantry, had gone cold in its bowl. My house, a small ranch in southeast Portland, felt enormous without my husband Robert. 12 years since cancer took him, and that empty chair across from me still made my chest tight. Come in, I said, standing slowly. My knees protested. The thermostat was set to 62 degrees to save on heating bills I could barely afford. We weren't sure you'd still be up, Jordan said, unwinding his cashmere scarf. We were at the Nines Hotel. Charity gala. Thought we'd stop by on our way home. The Nines Hotel. 5-star luxury in downtown Portland. The kind of place where a single drink cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I glanced at Everly. My daughter, who'd built a successful career in finance, married well, moved to a house in the West Hills I'd only seen in photos. She looked elegant in her black dress, diamonds glittering at her throat. A stranger wearing my daughter's face. That's kind, I said, though the words felt hollow. They hadn't visited in 4 months. 4 months of silence, broken only by brief phone calls where Everly sounded rushed and distracted. Everly moved through my small kitchen with practiced efficiency, finding clean mugs in the cupboard despite the years since she'd lived here. Jordan stood by the radiator, rubbing his hands together, his gaze drifting over my worn furniture, the patched sofa, the stack of bills on the side table I'd forgotten to hide. Mom, are you eating enough? Everly asked, her voice carrying that edge of concern that felt more like obligation than care. I'm fine, I lied. The food stamps stretched thin, but pride kept the truth locked away. She poured 3 mugs of coffee. I didn't own champagne glasses, and we sat at the small Formica table where I'd taught Everly multiplication tables 30 years ago. The same table where Robert and I had shared breakfast every morning for 40 years. Jordan cleared his throat, that polished smile settling onto his face like a mask. Daisy, he said, using my first name in that familiar way he'd adopted 2 years into their marriage. Everly and I were talking in the car. We wanted to check in about the Mustang. I blinked. The what? The Ford Mustang. Everly leaned forward, her eyes searching my face. The 1965 model. Jordan had it delivered to you last spring. Mom, do you like it? We've been meaning to ask, but with everything going on... My mind went completely blank. I set my coffee down carefully, my math teacher brain trying to process this information. Last spring. 7 months ago. A Ford Mustang. 1965. The dream car Robert and I had circled in magazines as newlyweds. The car we'd promised ourselves we'd buy someday when money wasn't so tight. Someday had never come. Everly, I said slowly, choosing each word with care. I haven't received any car. Jordan's smile didn't falter. Daisy, I had it delivered in May. The dealer confirmed delivery. I've been covering the insurance and registration fees ever since $6,000 a month to make sure you had reliable transportation and upkeep covered. $6,000 a month for 7 months. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. Years of teaching rowdy teenagers had taught me never to show alarm. "There's no car in my garage," I said. "There's no car anywhere." "Mom, are you sure?" Everly's concern deepened, and I saw something else flicker across her face. Worry. Not about me, about my memory, about my mind. Jordan had already planted that seed. "Everly," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I'm 68, not 98. My memory is fine. I wake up every morning, solve the crossword in 15 minutes, balance my checkbook to the penny. If someone had delivered a 1965 Ford Mustang to my house, I would remember." Jordan shifted in his seat, his expression still pleasant, but something harder beneath it. "The paperwork shows it was delivered. I have the receipts. Perhaps someone at the dealership made an error, or it was never delivered at all." I said the words coming out sharper than I intended. Silence settled over the table like fresh snow. Outside, distant fireworks popped and crackled, celebrating a year I wasn't sure I wanted to see. Everly looked between us. Confusion and something else, fear, maybe crossing her face. "I'm sure there's an explanation," she said quickly. "Jordan, maybe you should call the dealer tomorrow. Get it sorted out." "Of course," Jordan said smoothly. He stood buttoning his coat. "We should let you get some rest, Daisy. Long night." I rose too, my legs stiff from sitting in the cold house. Everly hugged me brief perfunctory and whispered, "Take care of yourself, Mom." I wanted to tell her I was trying. I wanted to tell her the furnace was broken, that I'd been living on soup and charity for months, that her weekly calls had dwindled to monthly check-ins, then nothing. Instead, I said, "You too, sweetheart." I watched them leave their luxury sedan, disappearing into the snowy night taillights bleeding red through the darkness. The house felt colder when they left. Quieter. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee mugs, now cold and forgotten. Everly's perfume still lingered faintly in the air, expensive, floral, unfamiliar. Robert had never worn anything like that. My husband had smelled of old spice and chalk dust, simple and honest and real. I set my mug down and looked around the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed weakly, fighting against the cold. The thermostat on the wall read 62 degrees, as high as I could afford to set it. Outside the window, snow drifted down in slow spirals, covering the empty driveway where no Ford Mustang had ever sat. 7 months. Jordan claimed he'd been paying for car insurance registration maintenance. $6,000 a month. $42,000 total. And if there was one thing 35 years of teaching math had taught me, it was this. Numbers don't lie. I pulled my cardigan tighter and stood my joints complaining. The house creaked softly, settling into the winter night like an old woman easing into bed. I opened the hallway closet and stared at the 2 coats I'd been wearing layered together since November. One navy blue, one olive green. Both thin. Both useless against an Oregon winter that didn't forgive poverty. The furnace had broken in October. The repair estimate, $800, was still folded in the junk drawer. I couldn't pay it, so I wore 2 coats inside, slept under 3 blankets, and told myself it was temporary. Spring would come. I hadn't told Everly. How could I? She was busy meetings, travel, charity events at luxury hotels. The last time she'd called 3 weeks ago, I'd told her I was fine. She'd sounded relieved. On the counter sat my weekly supplies, a loaf of bread from the food bank, canned chicken noodle soup from the church, powdered milk apples growing soft at the edges. My food stamps covered the basics. The church helped when it could. Pride kept me from asking for more. This was my life now. 68 years old, retired after decades teaching algebra and geometry to teenagers who rarely cared. A small pension. Smaller savings. Social Security that never stretched far enough. And a daughter living 20 minutes away in a house worth more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. I didn't resent her success. I was proud of her. But somewhere along the way, the distance between us had grown wider than miles. I walked to the small desk in the living room, the same one where I'd graded papers late into the night, helped Everly with homework, planned modest dreams with Robert. I opened the top drawer and took out my notebook. Teaching had trained me to document everything. Attendance grades, lesson plans. That habit never left. For 40 years, I'd tracked every dollar I spent, every bill paid, every transaction down to the penny. I opened to a fresh page and wrote the date, December 31st, New Year's Eve, the night my daughter asked about a car I'd never seen. Then I wrote Ford Mustang 1965, Jordan's claim delivered, May monthly payment, $6,000 total, claimed $42,000, evidence none. My hand didn't shake. This was familiar territory, breaking a problem into parts, identifying what was known and what was missing. Every equation had a solution if you were patient enough to find it. I replayed the past 7 months with the precision I once used to check students' work. May garden repairs. Fence work. No deliveries. June Everly's birthday. A brief thank you call. July. Fixed the leaking sink myself. Everly mentioned a vacation but didn't say where. August nothing. Silence. September furnace broke. Started wearing 2 coats indoors. October 3 hours in line to renew food assistance. November Thanksgiving alone. Everly texted from somewhere warm. December, a generic Christmas card. No visit. Not once had a car arrived. No phone calls, no paperwork, no insurance notices, no registration forms, no mention from Jordan until tonight. I wrote another line. Why now? The answer settled heavily in my chest. Because Everly had come over. Because she'd seen my house, the cold, the worn furniture, the bills. And Jordan needed an explanation for money that wasn't where it should be. I flipped to the back of the notebook and reviewed my bank statements. I kept everything filed, organized, documented. Everything balanced. No unusual deposits, no transfers. Just my pension and Social Security. Jordan said he'd been making payments. To whom? For what if the car didn't exist? The money had gone somewhere. I stood at the window and looked out at the quiet street. Snow-covered rooftops, empty sidewalks, bare trees. The world felt paused, holding its breath. Tomorrow I would go to the bank. I would ask questions. I would start uncovering what Jordan had done. Because I knew just as surely as I'd once proven mathematical theorems that he had done something. I thought about Everly's face when I said there was no car. The hesitation. Not doubt about Jordan, doubt about me. About my memory. About my mind. That hurt more than the cold. More than the empty pantry. More than 7 months of silence. I closed the notebook and stared at the empty driveway through the frost-edged glass. Tomorrow I would begin searching for answers. But tonight, I sat alone in the cold, wondering how a man could lie so easily and wondering what else he had lied about. The next morning I stood in my doorway, staring at the empty space where a vintage Ford Mustang was supposed to be parked. Frost coated the driveway in thin, crystalline sheets. The sun hung low and pale above the neighborhood, offering light without warmth. I had slept poorly 3, maybe 4 hours, my thoughts circling endlessly around the same questions. Jordan's lie had opened something in me like a wound that wouldn't close. I pulled on my heaviest coat, the olive green one with the torn lining I kept meaning to repair, and wrapped a wool scarf twice around my neck. The walk to First Pacific Bank was 12 blocks. In January in Portland, 12 blocks felt like an expedition. The streets were quiet. New Year's Day. Most people were still asleep or nursing hangovers from celebrations the night before. I passed houses with Christmas lights still glowing faintly in windows, cars buried under snow footprints from midnight revelers frozen solid in ice. My breath rose in white clouds. My knees ached. Still, I kept walking, my teacher's mind working through the problem as it always had, step-by-step, methodical patient. Known Jordan claimed he had paid $6,000 per month for 7 months. Known no car had ever been delivered. Unknown, where did the money go? Question, did the money ever exist? First Pacific Bank sat on a corner lot along Hawthorne Boulevard, a sturdy brick building that had survived 80 Oregon winters. I had banked there for 40 years, ever since Robert and I opened our first joint account with $53 and cautious optimism that teaching salaries would somehow be enough. They had been enough. Barely. And after Robert died, barely became not quite. I pushed through the heavy glass doors into warmth and fluorescent light. The lobby was nearly empty, a security guard by the entrance, 1 customer at the ATM, 2 tellers behind the counter. The younger teller, a woman with bright eyes and dark hair, pulled into a neat ponytail, smiled as I approached. Her name tag read Sarah. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "Good morning," I replied, unwinding my scarf. My fingers were stiff from the cold. "My name is Daisy Brooks. I need to review some transactions on my account." "Of course, Mrs. Brooks." She turned to her computer. "Do you have your account number, or I can look you up by name and date of birth?" I gave her both and watched her work, quick practiced, comfortable with systems I had never fully mastered. She was young, maybe Everly's age, with a professional warmth that made banking feel less impersonal. "Okay, I've got your account up," she said. "What transactions are you looking for?" I chose my words carefully. My son-in-law told me he's been making deposits into my account. $6,000 per month for the last 7 months. I'd like to verify the amounts and dates. Sarah's expression stayed polite, but something shifted, a slight tightening around her eyes. She scrolled more slowly now, her brow furrowing. "Mrs. Brooks," she said gently, "I'm not seeing any deposits like that. Your account shows only your monthly pension and Social Security deposits." My stomach tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "Nothing from May through December, no $6,000 deposits." "No, ma'am, nothing at all." I gripped the edge of the counter. My hands felt cold despite the warm bank. Could they be under a different account, one opened in my name without my knowledge? She nodded, immediately understanding crossing her face. "Let me do a broader search. What's his name?" "Jordan Pierce. He's married to my daughter Everly." Sarah typed again, moving through screens with practiced efficiency. Minutes passed. The ATM chimed behind me. The security guard shifted his weight near the door. I stood perfectly still, my heart beating with a steady rhythm that had carried me through decades of classrooms, through Robert's illness, through every moment that demanded calm. "Mrs. Brooks," Sarah said finally, her voice softer now. "I've checked all accounts associated with your name and Social Security number. There is actually one additional account I'm seeing." My breath caught. "It's listed as a subsidiary account, opened last May." She paused, reading carefully. "Account number ending in 7439. It shows your name as the account holder, but..." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. "But there's a secondary authorization. Jordan Pierce is listed as the primary account manager." The warmth of the bank suddenly felt oppressive. "Are you certain?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking at it right now." She hesitated, her professional mask slipping slightly. "Mrs. Brooks, this type of account is sometimes set up for family members who need assistance managing their finances. It says here it was established for elderly care purposes." Elderly care purposes. The words hit me like a slap. "Can you tell me about the transactions?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger rising in my chest. Sarah glanced around, then leaned closer. "I probably shouldn't be sharing this level of detail without proper authorization, but..." She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw compassion in her young eyes. "Given the circumstances, let me print you a summary." She turned to her printer, and I heard the soft whir of paper feeding through. When she handed me the pages, her hand was gentle. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Brooks," she said quietly. "If someone has been using your name without your knowledge, you should probably contact our fraud department, or talk to your family." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice catching slightly. "You've been very kind." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Would you like me to call someone for you?" "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. "Thank you." I slipped the papers into my coat pocket and turned toward the door. The security guard nodded as I passed, unaware that my entire understanding of the last 7 months had just shattered. Outside, the January cold hit me like a wall. I stood on the sidewalk, watching my breath vanish into the air. Cars moved along Hawthorne Boulevard. People going about their New Year's routines, unaware that my world had just tilted sideways. I walked half a block before I stopped, pulled out the papers, and read them standing there on the frozen sidewalk. Account number 7439, opened May 15th. 7 deposits May 15th, $6,000, June 15th, $6,000, July 15th, $6,000, August 15th, $6,000, September 15th, $6,000, October 15th, $6,000, November 15th, $6,000, total $42,000, and beneath the deposits a list of withdrawals that made my hands shake, $18,000. Cascade Property Ventures, 4,500, Turquoise Travel Agency, 3,200, Nordstrom Multiple Charges, 2,800, Pearl District Country Club, 1,500, various luxury retailers, 12,000, cash withdrawals, ATM various dates, every penny, gone. Jordan hadn't been taking care of me. He'd been stealing from me while making Everly believe he was being generous. But where had the original money come from? And more importantly, did Everly know I folded the papers carefully and slid them back into my pocket? My breath came in short bursts, visible in the cold air. The question was no longer whether Jordan had lied. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I began walking again, not toward home, but east, toward downtown Portland, toward the tall glass building where Everly worked, where answers might be waiting. When I got home 2 hours later, my feet aching from the walk, I sat down at my kitchen table and picked up the phone with trembling hands. The bank statement lay spread before me, 3 pages of proof that no money had ever reached my actual account, that Jordan's generosity was a fabrication built on lies. But I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of what he'd done. I dialed the number I'd found online for North Star Financial Group, Everly's employer, the sleek glass tower downtown where my daughter worked as a senior analyst doing work I'd never fully understood but knew paid well enough for a house in the West Hills and cars that cost more than my yearly pension. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional. North Star Financial Group, how may I direct your call? Accounting department, please, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. One moment. Hold music, something classical Vivaldi maybe filled my ear. I stared at my notebook where I'd written Jordan's claims over and over 7 months. $6,000 per month. Where did it go? Accounting, this is Janet speaking. How can I help you? The voice was younger than mine, warm and efficient. Good afternoon, Janet. My name is Daisy Brooks. I'm calling about a family financial matter that I believe your office might be able to help me with. Of course, Mrs. Brooks. What kind of matter are we talking about? I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. I need to verify some transactions. My son-in-law, Jordan Pierce, told me he's been making monthly payments on my behalf through your company. 7 payments of $6,000 each, starting in May of last year. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Jordan Pierce, Janet said slowly. Yes, I see his account here. He's married to Everly Brooks, one of our senior analysts. That's correct? More typing. I waited, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car drove past, tires crunching on ice-packed streets. Yes, Mrs. Brooks, Janet said, her tone shifting, slightly more cautious now. I do see 7 transfers from Mr. Pierce's personal account. Each one is $6,000 made monthly from May through November. They were transferred to an account listed under your name. My grip tightened on the phone. But I never received that money. I checked with my bank this morning. There's nothing in my primary account. Another pause, longer this time. That's concerning, Janet said carefully. Let me look at the destination account more closely. More clicking, more typing. When Janet spoke again, her voice had dropped to something quieter, almost conspiratorial. Mrs. Brooks, she said slowly, this account, the one receiving the transfers, it's a subsidiary account. It was opened in your name, but... She hesitated. But what? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. But it was opened by Mr. Pierce. The signature on file shows you as the account holder, but all the authorization and access controls are under his name. He's listed as the primary manager for elderly care purposes. There it was again. Elderly care purposes. The room tilted slightly. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself. Can you tell me the account number? I asked, pulling my pen closer. Janet read it slowly. Account ending in 7439. The same account Sarah had shown me at the bank. I've never seen this number before, I said quietly. I never opened this account. I never authorized Jordan to do anything on my behalf. Ma'am, Janet said carefully, can you tell me what happened to the money after it was transferred? Was it withdrawn, transferred again? I'm not sure I should be sharing this level of detail without proper authorization, she began, then stopped. I heard her take a breath. Mrs. Brooks, may I ask how old are you? 68. And you're managing your own finances, paying your own bills, making your own decisions. Yes, I said firmly. I've been managing my finances since I was 18 years old. I balanced my checkbook to the penny every month for 50 years. There is nothing wrong with my mind. I believe you, Janet said softly. Hold on. The hold music returned briefly before she came back on the line. Mrs. Brooks, I checked with my supervisor. Given the circumstances, given that you are clearly capable of managing your own affairs and were unaware of this account, we can provide you with basic transaction information. Thank you. After the money was transferred into that account, Janet continued reading carefully. There were multiple withdrawals and additional transfers. The largest ones were, let me see, there's an $18,000 payment to something called Cascade Property Ventures. My pen scratched across the paper. There's a $4,500 charge to a travel agency, Turquoise Travel it looks like, for tickets to the Bahamas. The Bahamas. I remembered Everly's text in November. Having a wonderful time somewhere warm. Wish you were here. Multiple charges at high-end retailers, Janet continued. Nordstrom Saks Fifth Avenue, several thousand at Pearl District Country Club for membership fees. And the rest, she paused. The rest appears to have been withdrawn in cash over several months. My hand had stopped moving across the page. I stared at the numbers I'd just written, each one a betrayal, each one a lie. Jordan had told while I wore 2 coats indoors and ate soup from the food bank. Mrs. Brooks, Janet's voice was gentle. Are you still there? Yes, I whispered. I'm here. I'm so sorry. This doesn't seem right at all. You should probably contact your bank and possibly report this as fraud. Or, she hesitated. Or talk to your family about what's happening. Thank you, Janet, I said. You've been very helpful, more than you know. Is there anything else I can do? No, you've given me exactly what I needed. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my kitchen, staring at the numbers I'd just written. An account in my name that I'd never opened, controlled by a man I'd never authorized, filled with money that had never reached me. $42,000 gone, spent on property vacations, luxuries. While I wore 2 coats indoors and ate donated soup, I set the phone down gently and stared at the string of numbers and charges. Jordan hadn't been taking care of me. He'd been stealing from me while making Everly believe he was being generous. The question burning in my chest was simple and terrible. Did Everly know? 3 days later, a firm knock on my door cut through the silence I'd been living in. I'd spent those 3 days at my kitchen table filling pages of my notebook with numbers, dates, questions that had no answers yet. The house remained cold, the broken furnace still broken, my 2 coats still necessary, but the chill I felt had less to do with temperature and more to do with the growing certainty that Jordan Pierce had been systematically stealing from me while pretending to be my savior. The knock came again, more insistent. I set down my pen and walked to the door, my joints protesting the movement. Through the frosted window, I could see a figure in a dark overcoat holding a briefcase. Not Jordan. This man was older, broader, with silver hair visible even through the distorted glass. I opened the door. Mrs. Brooks, the man said, extending his hand. My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm the chief accountant at North Star Financial Group. Janet told me about your phone call. May I come in? I studied him for a moment, the tired eyes, the expensive but worn suit, the briefcase that looked heavy with more than just papers. He had the demeanor of someone who'd worked with numbers long enough to know when they told stories people didn't want heard. Please, I said, stepping aside. Robert entered, stamping snow from his shoes with automatic courtesy. He looked around my small living room, the patched furniture, the thermostat set to barely livable, the stack of bills I still hadn't hidden, and something in his expression softened. Can I offer you coffee? I asked, leading him to the kitchen table. That would be kind, thank you. I made coffee the way I always did, careful, measured, making the grounds stretch as far as possible. Robert sat at the table, setting his briefcase beside his chair, saying nothing while I worked. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who understood that some conversations required patience. When I set the mugs down, Robert wrapped his hands around his warming them. Mrs. Brooks, he said, I think there are some things you need to know. After Janet spoke with you, I reviewed the accounts myself more thoroughly than we normally would. What I found concerned me enough that I felt I needed to tell you in person. And, I said, sitting across from him. Robert opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick, organized, marked with tabs. These are copies, he said, turning it so I could see. The originals are in our files, but I thought you should have documentation of your own. He opened the folder to the first page, bank statements, transfer receipts. Account authorization forms, all printed on official North Star financial letterhead. 7 transfers from Jordan Pierce's personal account starting May 15th of last year and ending November 15th. Each transfer was exactly $6,000. I looked at the numbers, clean, precise, undeniable. May $6,000, June $6,000, July through November the same. Total at the bottom of the page, $42,000. And they went to an account opened in your name. Robert continued, flipping to another page. Account number ending in 7439, but here's where it gets complicated. He pulled out another document, an account authorization form. My name was typed at the top, Daisy Margaret Brooks. Below it a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. This signature, Robert said quietly, was used to open the account, But when I compared it to your signature on file from when you opened your original checking account decades ago, he pulled out another paper, my actual signature from 1983, shaky but clearly mine. They don't match. I stared at the two signatures side by side. The forged one had the right letters, the right general shape, but the loops were wrong. The angle of the D was too sharp. The flow was different. Someone had forged my name. Jordan Pierce is listed as the account manager, Robert said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. He signed all the authorization papers claiming you needed assistance managing your finances due to age-related cognitive decline. The words hit me like a physical blow. Cognitive decline. As if I were senile. As if I couldn't be trusted with my own money. I'm 68, I said, my voice tight. Not 98. I balance my checkbook to the penny. I solve crosswords in ink. I remember everything. I know, Robert said gently. Janet told me how clearly you spoke on the phone, how precisely you remembered dates and amounts. That's why I'm here. Because what Jordan Pierce did... He paused, choosing his words carefully. What he did was fraud. Elder financial exploitation. And it's illegal. I sat back the coffee, forgotten my mind working through the implications. Where did the money go? I asked, though part of me already knew. Robert flipped to another section, this one filled with withdrawal records. Multiple places. $18,000 to something called Cascade Property Ventures, I checked, and it's a real estate investment under Jordan's name. $4,500 to a travel agency for flights and accommodations in the Bahamas. Several thousand at luxury retailers. The rest withdrawn as cash over several months. Each number was another betrayal, another lie, another month I'd spent struggling while Jordan used my name to fund his lifestyle. Does Everly know? I asked the question I'd been avoiding for 3 days. Robert's expression darkened. That's harder to say. She works in a different department at North Star. She wouldn't have access to her husband's personal accounts. It's possible she believed his story about the car and the payments. Or, I prompted. Or she was part of it, Robert finished quietly. I wanted to believe Everly was innocent, that my daughter wouldn't knowingly participate in stealing from her own mother. But another part, the part that remembered her brief visits, her distracted phone calls, her relief when I said I was fine, wondered if she'd simply chosen not to ask questions because the answers would be inconvenient. There's something else you need to know, Robert said, his voice dropping lower, more serious. Men like Jordan Pierce don't give up easily when they're cornered. If you confront him with this evidence, if you take legal action, he will fight back. He'll try to discredit you, claim you're confused or forgetful. He's already laid the groundwork by putting cognitive decline in the account documentation. I'm not confused, I said firmly. I know that, but he'll try to make others believe you are. He'll pressure Everly to support his version of events. He might even try to intimidate you, make you feel like pursuing this isn't worth the trouble. I looked at Robert, this man I'd met 30 minutes ago who'd taken time from his own life to bring me evidence, to warn me, to help me understand what had been done to me. Why are you doing this? I asked. You don't know me. This isn't your problem. Robert's expression softened, and for the first time I saw real pain in his eyes. My father died 5 years ago, he said quietly. He was a widower living alone, managing fine. Then his caregiver, someone he trusted, started draining his accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger. By the time we noticed, she'd taken nearly $30,000. We reported it, but she'd covered her tracks well enough that proving it was difficult. My father died before we could get justice for him. He paused, his jaw tight. I see the same pattern here, Mrs. Brooks. Someone taking advantage of a decent person who's too proud to ask for help, too isolated to notice until it's too late. I won't let that happen again if I can prevent it. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between us. Then Robert stood, gathering the papers and placing them carefully in a folder, which he handed to me. These are copies for your records. Keep them somewhere safe. And Mrs. Brooks, he met my eyes. Be careful. Document everything. If Jordan contacts you, write it down. If he makes threats, record them if you can. Build your case carefully. I will, I said, standing to shake his hand. Thank you, Robert. Truly. You're welcome. And if you need anything, if things get complicated... He pulled a business card from his wallet. Call me. He left, his footsteps fading down my front walk. I stood at the window watching his car disappear into the winter afternoon, then sat at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence of Jordan's theft. That night I opened my old notebook and carefully wrote Jordan Pierce fraud, $42,000 plus expenses, forged signature, false claims of cognitive decline. I will not let this go. And beneath that, a simple question that would drive everything that came next. How do I prove the truth when the liar has already convinced everyone I'm the one who's confused? That night my phone rang just as I was reviewing Robert's documents for the third time. The evidence lay spread across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that finally made horrible sense. Everly's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, steadying my breath. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice even. "Mom," her voice sounded tight, strained in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Why do you ask?" There was a pause, careful and deliberate. "Jordan said you called his office, that you were asking about money, about accounts and transfers." So Jordan already knew. Robert had warned me this would happen. Once I started asking questions, Jordan would move to protect himself. "I was checking on some things," I said calmly, "making sure everything adds up." "Adds up?" Everly's voice lifted slightly, and I heard something underneath it, worry but also doubt. "Mom, Jordan said you sounded confused, that you were asking about accounts that don't exist, saying you never received money that was sent to you." My jaw tightened, but I kept my tone steady. Years of managing classrooms full of teenagers had taught me how to stay calm when being challenged. Everly, I asked specific questions about specific transactions. There was nothing confused about it. "I know, but—" She hesitated, and I could almost see her standing in her beautiful West Hills kitchen, designer clothes, diamonds, glittering, trying to reconcile the mother she knew with the image Jordan was painting. "He's worried about you, Mom. We both are. You've been alone for so long, and sometimes when people get older—" "Everly," I interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm 68, not 88. My mind is clear. I know exactly what I'm doing." "I know that, Mom. Of course I do." But her voice wavered, uncertain. "But Jordan thinks you've been under stress, that maybe things are harder to keep track of than you realize. He said you asked about a Ford Mustang he gave you, but you claimed you never got it." There it was, Jordan's story already forming. The generous son-in-law caring for an aging mother-in-law who couldn't remember the help she'd received. Forgetfulness. Decline. A perfect cover. "Everly," I said carefully, "I never received a Ford Mustang. I never received any payments. I've lived on my pension and Social Security for 7 months. That's the truth." "But Jordan showed me receipts," she said, her voice rising. "He's been paying $6,000 a month for what?" I asked, cutting her off. "What did he say the money was for?" She hesitated. "For your care. The car. Insurance. Making sure you had everything you needed." "And did you ever see the car?" I asked quietly. "Did you ever come here and see this Mustang's silence? Long enough to answer the question." "You haven't visited in 4 months," I said, keeping my voice soft, not accusatory. "How would you know what I have?" "That's not fair," she said quickly, defensively. "I've been busy. Jordan said he was checking on you, that everything was fine." "Everything is not fine," I replied, my voice firm. "But not for the reasons Jordan is suggesting." "What do you mean?" I wanted to tell her everything about the forged signature, the fraudulent account, the money spent on Jordan's investments while I wore coats indoors. But Robert's warning echoed in my head. Jordan would fight back, and Everly might not be ready to hear it. "Everly," I asked instead, "has Jordan suggested I see a doctor?" Another pause, this one heavier. He mentioned it might be a good idea. Just a checkup to make sure everything's okay. Cognitively. "There's nothing wrong with my cognition," I said evenly. "But I'll make you a deal. I'll get a full cognitive assessment from a licensed psychologist. If it shows any problems, we'll talk about next steps. But if it shows I'm completely sound, then we need to have a different conversation. About why Jordan is claiming I received things I never got." I could hear her breathing on the other end, processing. "Okay," she said finally, her voice small. "That seems reasonable. Good. I'll schedule it this week." "Mom, Jordan wouldn't lie," she said quietly, almost pleading. "He's my husband. He loves me. He's been generous to you." "Then he won't mind providing documentation," I said. "The car registration, the insurance policies, the receipts showing where he bought this Mustang. If he's telling the truth, the paperwork will prove it." Silence again. "Will you ask him for those documents?" I pressed gently. "Just to put my mind at ease." Okay, I'll ask. Thank you, sweetheart. I love you. I love you too, Mom. The call ended and I set the phone down carefully. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from anger. Jordan had already started poisoning my daughter against me, planting seeds of doubt about my mental capacity. But I wouldn't let him win. I picked up the phone again and dialed the number Robert had given me for Dr. Patricia Hayes, the clinical psychologist he'd recommended. Time to prove I wasn't the confused old woman Jordan needed me to be. 3 days later, I sat in a doctor's office taking a cognitive assessment. The office was at Providence Medical Center, a modern building with bright fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of medical facilities everywhere. Dr. Patricia Hayes sat across from me with a clipboard, her expression professional but kind. She was in her early 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "I understand you're here for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Can you tell me why you're requesting this assessment?" I chose my words carefully, keeping my voice steady. "My family has expressed concern about my memory and mental clarity. I want documented proof that my cognitive function is intact." She nodded, making a note. "That's a reasonable request. We'll go through several standardized tests today: memory, attention, language skills, problem solving. Please answer as accurately as you can and don't worry if you don't know something. That's perfectly normal. Ready to begin? Ready." She started with the mini mental state examination, the MMSE. I'd researched it beforehand not to cheat, but to understand what would be assessed. Orientation to time and place, memory, attention and calculation, language skills. "What is today's date?" Dr. Hayes asked. "January 7th, 2026. "And where are we right now?" "Providence Medical Center, 12th floor, Portland, Oregon, United States of America." She smiled slightly. "Very good. Now I'm going to say 3 words. Please repeat them after me. Apple, table, penny. Apple, table, penny. Excellent. Now can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" I'd done this calculation thousands of times teaching students about sequences and patterns. The numbers came automatically. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. Perfect. Now can you recall those 3 words I asked you to remember? Apple, table, penny. She continued through the assessment, asking me to name objects, follow 3-step commands, read and obey written instructions, write a complete sentence, copy a geometric design. Each task was simple, almost insultingly so for someone who'd taught advanced mathematics for 35 years, but I understood their purpose. They were designed to catch deficits, lapses, signs of cognitive decline. I had none. My hands were steady as I drew the intersecting pentagons. My mind was clear as I followed multi-step instructions. My memory was sharp as I recalled lists of words minutes after hearing them. After an hour, Dr. Hayes set down her clipboard and smiled a real smile, this time warm and genuine. "Mrs. Brooks, your cognitive function is excellent. You scored 30 out of 30 on the MMSE, which indicates no impairment whatsoever. Your memory, reasoning, attention, and language skills are all well within normal ranges for your age, in fact above average in several areas." Relief flooded through me, though I'd known I would pass. It was one thing to know you were mentally sound. It was another to have professional documentation. "Can you provide that in writing?" I asked. "Of course. I'll prepare a formal report documenting today's assessment. You should have it within 24 hours. "Thank you, Doctor." That evening I scanned the document and emailed it to Everly. No explanation, no commentary. Just the report with its clear professional conclusion. Cognitive function, intact. MMSE score, 30/30. Perfect conclusion. No evidence of memory impairment or cognitive decline. Performance above average for age group in areas of attention calculation and verbal recall. Patient demonstrates excellent mental acuity and clear capacity for independent decision-making. I didn't call her afterward. I wanted her to sit with that information to see the professional objective proof that her husband's narrative was false. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Jordan. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice calm and measured. "Hello, Jordan." His voice was smooth concern, the same tone he'd used on New Year's Eve when he'd asked about the Mustang. "Daisy, hi. Everly showed me the test results. That's great news. Really great." "Yes, it is. Though you know." He paused, and I could hear the calculation in the silence, the careful choosing of words. Sometimes early signs of decline are subtle, hard to catch even with standard tests. Have you considered seeing a neurologist, getting a more specialized evaluation? Mayo Clinic has an excellent geriatric neurology department. There it was. Even faced with evidence, Jordan was trying to undermine it to suggest the assessment wasn't thorough enough, that there might still be something wrong with me that justified his claims. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and sharp, but I kept my voice cold and steady. Jordan, I said quietly, my mind is completely sound. Sound enough to know exactly what you've been doing. Silence. Longer this time, heavier. I don't know what you mean, he said finally, his tone shifting less smooth, more guarded. Yes, you do. The account you opened in my name, the $42,000 you transferred and spent on yourself, the forged signature, the Mustang that never existed. I know all of it. Another pause. When Jordan spoke again, his voice had hardened, the pleasant mask slipping. Daisy, I think you're confused. I've been trying to help you, and now you're making accusations that don't make sense. This is exactly the kind of paranoia that proves what? I interrupted. That I'm losing my mind. I have documents, Jordan. Bank records, transfer receipts, proof of where every dollar went. $18,000 for your real estate investment. $4,500 for a vacation to the Bahamas. Complete silence on the other end. I know everything. I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. And I'm not backing down. I don't understand what you're talking about, Jordan said, but his voice had lost its confidence, its certainty. I need to go. We'll discuss this later. The line went dead. I set the phone down, my hand shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of confrontation. Jordan was worried. Good. He should be. But I knew this wasn't over. Robert had warned me men like Jordan don't give up when cornered. They escalate. And I needed to be ready. 2 nights later, at 11 o'clock, Robert Sullivan's phone rang. He told me about it the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with dark circles under his eyes and a fury in his voice I hadn't heard before. He called me last night, Robert said, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Jordan, he knew about my wife Daisy. He knew Catherine has cancer. My blood ran cold. How would he know that? I don't know. We've kept it private, but somehow he found out. Robert's jaw tightened. He offered me $50,000. For what, mate? To recant everything. To tell you I made mistakes in the documents, that I misunderstood the account structure. Robert set down his mug, his hand trembling slightly. He said if I didn't take the money, he'd get me fired from North Star. Said I'd violated confidentiality by sharing your information. That I'd lose my job and with it my health insurance. Your wife's treatment, I whispered. Exactly. He threatened Catherine's cancer treatment, Daisy. He said she'd have to figure out how to pay for chemo without coverage. I felt sick. Robert, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to... Don't apologize, he said firmly. What he did was a crime. Witness tampering, bribery, extortion, and I recorded every word. I stared at him. You what? Robert pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Jordan's voice filled my kitchen, smooth, confident, threatening. Robert, let me be clear with you. You have 2 choices. Accept $50,000 in cash, and you simply forget a few details about that subsidiary account. The recording continued for 8 minutes. Jordan's voice grew harder, more menacing, as he detailed exactly what he'd do if Robert refused. The threat to his job. The threat to Catherine's insurance. The meeting location, Powell's City of Books parking lot, tomorrow night at 8. And Robert, this offer expires tomorrow. If you're not there, I'll assume you've made your choice. I'll contact North Star's compliance department first thing Friday morning. You'll be fired by noon. Your insurance will be canceled within 30 days. And Catherine will have to figure out treatment without coverage. When the recording ended, I sat in stunned silence. He's desperate, Robert said quietly. He knows you're building a case. He knows the evidence is damning, so he's trying to eliminate the witnesses. What are you going to do? Robert's eyes were hard. I'm going to give this recording to a lawyer, and then I'm going to make sure Jordan Pierce faces every consequence he deserves. I know someone, I said, thinking of Elizabeth Morgan, the colleague who'd left teaching 20 years ago to become an attorney specializing in elder law. She can help us. Good. Robert stood downloading the recording to a USB drive and handing it to me. Keep this safe. Make copies. And Daisy? Yes. Be careful. If he's threatening me, he might come after you next. That afternoon, I sat in Elizabeth Morgan's downtown office, a sleek space on the 15th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Elizabeth sat across from me, 61 now, her hair gray, but her eyes as sharp as they'd been when we taught together at Roosevelt High. "Daisy Brooks," she said, standing to embrace me. "It's been too long. I wish I were here under better circumstances. Robert called ahead. He told me everything." She gestured to the conference table where she'd already laid out legal pads and folders. "Let's go through this systematically." For the next 2 hours, I told her everything. The New Year's Eve question, the bank investigation, Robert's evidence, the forged signature, the cognitive assessment, Jordan's phone call, the recorded threat. Elizabeth listened without interrupting, taking notes in neat, precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back and removed her reading glasses. "This is textbook elder financial exploitation," she said. "Under Oregon law, that's a felony. The witness tampering adds federal charges. We have him, Daisy." "But Everly doesn't believe me," I said quietly. "She thinks I'm confused, that Jordan is trying to help and I'm misinterpreting everything." "Then we need to show her the truth in a way she can't deny." Elizabeth leaned forward. "I suggest a family dinner. Here's what we do. You invite both of them to your house. Casual, normal. We set up recording equipment legal in Oregon with single-party consent, which is you. We let Jordan lie. We catch every contradiction. And when he's thoroughly trapped, we present the evidence. You think that will work? I think your daughter loves you. She's been manipulated, but she's not stupid. If she sees Jordan lie to your face, if she hears him contradict himself, if she's confronted with documentary evidence, she'll have to choose. And I believe she'll choose you. And if she doesn't," Elizabeth's expression softened, "then we proceed with legal action anyway, but I don't think it will come to that." "When 2 weeks, that gives us time to prepare to gather every piece of evidence to build an airtight case. Can you wait 2 weeks? I thought about 7 months of cold, 7 months of hunger, 7 months of lies. I can wait. Good. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Every interaction with Jordan, every conversation with Everly. Keep that notebook of yours updated." As I stood to leave, Elizabeth touched my arm. "Daisy, there's one more thing. We should file for a cognitive assessment to be entered into the court record, not just the MMSC, but a full neuropsychological evaluation. It'll cost about $1,500, but it will demolish any claim that you're incompetent." $1,500. I thought about my bank account, my meager savings. But I thought about justice more. "I'll find the money," I said. "Good, because when we're done, Jordan Pierce will wish he'd never heard your name." I met Everly 5 days later at Stumptown Coffee in downtown Portland. She'd suggested it neutral ground, busy enough that we wouldn't make a scene. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a latte growing cold in front of her. She looked tired, I realized. Dark circles under her eyes. Her designer clothes perfectly pressed, but something in her posture suggested exhaustion. "Hi, Mom," she said, standing to hug me. "Hi, sweetheart." We sat, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I watched her fidget with her coffee cup, twisting it in small circles on the table. "I'm glad you wanted to meet," I said finally. "I've been thinking a lot," she said quietly. "About what you said, about the car and the money and everything." She looked up at me. "Jordan showed me some papers. Bank statements, he said, proving he made the transfers." "To which account?" She blinked. "What do you mean? Did the statements show deposits into my checking account, the one I've had for 40 years at First Pacific Bank?" I don't know. I didn't look that closely." She bit her lip. "He said they proved everything, and I believed him." "Everly, do you remember the vacation to the Bahamas in July?" Her eyes flickered with something surprise, maybe guilt. "Yes, it was our anniversary trip." "How did Jordan say he paid for it?" "With a bonus, from the Cascade deal." But her voice was uncertain now, questioning. "Ask him to show you the bank statement with that bonus deposit," I said gently. "Ask him for the actual records showing money coming in, not just going out." She stared at her coffee. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I love you," I said simply. "And because the truth matters. Jordan said you're trying to come between us, that you've always been jealous of our success, our life." "Do you believe that?" I interrupted softly. "Have I ever been anything but proud of you?" Tears filled her eyes. "No, But he's my husband, Mom. I want to believe him. I want to believe he's been helping you, that this is all some misunderstanding. Then verify it, I said. Ask for documentation. The car title, the insurance policies, the receipts. If Jordan is telling the truth, he'll have all of it. If he can't produce those documents, what does that tell you? She was quiet for a long moment, tears sliding down her cheeks. I invited you both to dinner, I said. Sunday week. Will you come? What's the point? The point is truth, Everly. I'm going to show you everything, all the evidence, all the documents. And then you can make your own decision about what's real and what's a lie. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. Jordan won't want to come. Tell him I'm making pot roast, your favorite. Tell him I want to clear the air to apologize if I've been confused. I met her eyes. Just get him there. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and I held her longer than usual, breathing in the expensive perfume and the faint scent underneath that was still my little girl. When I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Everly stood there watching me go, her hand pressed to her mouth. She was starting to doubt. I could see it. And doubt was the first crack in Jordan's armor. The next 10 days passed in a blur of preparation. Elizabeth came to my house with Frank Wilson, the 72-year-old veteran who'd shown up at my door 3 days after Robert's call, saying simply, "Heard you might need backup." Frank had known Robert from the VFW, and when he'd heard about Jordan's threats, he'd appointed himself my unofficial bodyguard. "No arguing," Frank had said in his gruff way. "I'm staying until this is over." And he had. Sleeping on my couch, making coffee in the mornings, sitting quietly while Elizabeth and I planned. Now Elizabeth was setting up small recording devices around my dining room, legal, she'd assured me, under Oregon's single-party consent law. Audio only, she said, positioning one near the table. We don't need video, just clear recordings of everything Jordan says. And you'll be in the next room, I asked, with Robert and Frank, listening. If things escalate, we're 30 seconds away. I practiced my part. Stay calm, ask questions, let Jordan lie. Don't interrupt. The more he talks, the deeper he digs. On Saturday night, Everly called. We'll be there tomorrow, she said. 6 o'clock. Thank you, sweetheart. Mom, her voice was small. I asked Jordan for the car paperwork, the title, the insurance. And he said he'd bring it tomorrow, to show you in person. My heart raced. Okay. But Mom, he couldn't find it right away. He had to look for it. And that seems what? Strange, she finished quietly. If you'd bought someone a $40,000 car, wouldn't you know exactly where the papers were? Yes, I said gently. You would. After she hung up, I sat at my kitchen table looking at the pot roast I'd prepared, the table set with Robert's mother's china, the house clean and warm, the furnace finally fixed with money I'd borrowed from Elizabeth. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Jordan Pierce would walk into a trap of his own making, and my daughter would finally see the truth. Sunday morning, I woke at 5:30, unable to sleep. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table watching dawn break over Portland. The city looked clean and new under fresh snow, innocent and peaceful. In 12 hours, everything would be different. Frank emerged from the living room fully dressed despite the early hour. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. No. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me. I've been in combat, he said quietly. Saw action in Desert Storm, and I can tell you what you're doing today takes more courage than anything I did over there. I'm just telling the truth. No, he said firmly. You're fighting for your family, against someone who should protect it. That's harder than fighting enemies. At noon, Elizabeth arrived with Robert. They went through the house one more time, checking the recording equipment, making sure everything worked. Remember, Elizabeth said, let him talk, ask gentle questions. When he contradicts himself, point it out calmly. Don't get angry, don't shout, just let the truth speak. I will. At 4 o'clock, I started cooking. Pot roast, the recipe I'd made 1,000 times. Carrots, potatoes, onions, the smell filling the house with warmth and memory. This was the meal I'd made for every important occasion. Birthdays, holidays, celebrations. Today, it was for truth. At 5:30, Elizabeth, Robert, and Frank positioned themselves in my bedroom door, cracked, listening equipment ready. We're here, Elizabeth said. You're not alone. At 5:55, I stood in my kitchen wearing my best dress, the blue one Robert had bought me for our 30th anniversary. I looked at my reflection in the window, 68 years old, gray hair, neat hands, steady. I was ready. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and walked to the door. This was it, the moment of truth. I opened the door to find Everly and Jordan standing on my porch. Everly smiled nervously. Jordan's expression was pleasant, controlled, but I saw tension in his shoulders, wariness in his eyes. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. "Come in," I said warmly. "Everything's ready." They stepped inside and I closed the door behind them. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was spring it. The pot roast sat in the center of my dining table, steam rising in the warm light. I'd set the table with care, my late husband Robert's mother's china, the pieces we'd only used for special occasions. White porcelain with delicate blue flowers along the edges. Each plate, each cup held memories of better times. Tonight would be memorable for different reasons. Everly stood in my kitchen, taking in the scene. "Mom, this is beautiful. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble," I said, pulling out her chair. "It's been too long since we had a real family dinner." Jordan remained standing, his eyes moving around the room with the careful assessment of someone looking for threats. Did he suspect, or was this just his nature, always calculating, always controlling? "Please sit," I said warmly. "Everything's ready." He sat slowly, unbuttoning his designer coat but not removing it, ready to leave quickly if needed. I served the food, passing plates, pouring water. For the first few minutes, we ate in relative silence, the awkward quiet of people who'd once been close but had drifted into something else, something colder. "This is delicious, Daisy," Jordan said finally, his voice carrying that smooth charm I'd come to recognize as a mask. "You're an excellent cook." "Robert's mother taught me," I replied. She believed a good meal brought families together. That food was love made visible. Everly touched my hand. "I miss her, and Dad." "I know, sweetheart. So do I." We talked about safe things for a while. The weather, Everly's work, the new restaurant that opened downtown. Jordan told a story about a client that made Everly laugh, and for just a moment I could see why my daughter had fallen in love with him. When he wanted to be Jordan, Pierce was charming, attentive, warm. But I knew what lay beneath that charm now. I waited until they'd both relaxed, until their guards were down, until Jordan had settled back in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Then I struck. "Jordan," I said casually, cutting a piece of carrot, "I wanted to thank you properly for that Mustang. I've been telling my friends about it, and they're so impressed by your generosity." His fork paused halfway to his mouth, just for a fraction of a second. Then he smiled. "Of course, Daisy. I'm glad you're appreciating it." I want to describe it accurately when I talk about it. I continued, my voice light and conversational. "What color was it again? I want to make sure I get the details right." "Navy blue," he said without hesitation. "Classic color for a 65. Everly's head came up, confusion crossing her face. "Blue, honey, I thought you said it was red." The temperature in the room dropped. Jordan's smile tightened just slightly. "No, sweetheart. Blue. You must have misheard me." "I'm pretty sure you said red," Everly insisted, her voice uncertain. "You said Mom would love it because she always wanted a red Mustang like in those Steve McQueen movies." I set down my fork gently. "Bullet had a green Mustang, actually. Highland green. Not red. And I never told anyone I wanted one." Jordan's eyes flicked to me, reassessing. "Memory can be funny. People remember things differently." "True," I agreed pleasantly. "So let's focus on facts instead of memories. Where exactly was the car delivered?" "To your driveway, Daisy." His voice had an edge now barely perceptible. "We discussed this on New Year's." "Which driveway?" I asked. "The front or the side?" "The front, obviously." I nodded slowly. "That's interesting, because my garage door has been broken for 3 years. The track rusted off the hinges in 2023. Anyone delivering a car would have noticed immediately that they couldn't put it in the garage." "They parked it in the driveway then," Jordan said smoothly. "Outside. For 7 months." I asked, my voice still light, still pleasant. "Through an Oregon winter without me noticing a vintage car sitting in my driveway every single day." Everly set down her fork, her eyes moving between us. "Or maybe," Jordan said, his jaw tightening, "they used the side entrance to the property." "Jordan," I said gently, There is no side entrance to my garage. It's a single-car garage, one door. That's been broken for 3 years. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. What's going on? Everly asked quietly. I'm just trying to understand the details, I said calmly. Jordan, what was the exact delivery date? May 15th, he said. I'd have to check the paperwork for the exact time. The paperwork you brought with you tonight, I asked. Everly mentioned you'd bring the car title, the insurance documents. Jordan's hand moved to his coat pocket, then stopped. I forgot them at home, but I have them. I can show you next time. That's unfortunate, I said, because those documents would clear everything up, wouldn't they? I paused. What was the name of the dealership? A specialty dealer, Jordan said, his voice tightening. I can't recall the exact name right now. You spent $42,000 on a car, and you can't remember where you bought it. It was months ago, Daisy. Details blur. I leaned forward slightly. What about the VIN insurance companies require a VIN number? Surely you remember that. I don't have it memorized. He snapped, his composure cracking. But you have the insurance papers at home, I pressed gently. With the dealer paperwork and the title. Yes. So you can bring all of that tomorrow to prove the car exists. Jordan stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against my floor. I don't appreciate being interrogated in your home, Daisy. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior I warned Everly about. Sit down, Jordan, I said quietly. We're not finished. I think we are. He reached for his coat. Mom, what's happening? Everly's voice was small, frightened. I stood and walked to my sideboard, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder Robert had given me. I set it on the table in front of Everly. Sweetheart, I need you to look at something. Everly's hands trembled as she opened the folder. I watched her face as she read confusion giving way to shock, giving way to horror. These are bank statements, she whispered. From an account opened in my name, I said. An account I never authorized, an account I didn't know existed until last week. She looked up at Jordan, tears already forming in her eyes. What is this? Your mother is confused, Jordan said, his voice hard. She's created some conspiracy theory. Look at the signature, I interrupted, pointing to the account authorization form. Compare it to my real signature. I pulled out another document, my signature from my original checking account opened in 1983, placed them side by side. The differences were obvious. The angle wrong, the loops different, the pressure uneven. Someone forged my name, I said quietly. Someone opened an account, claimed I needed help managing my money due to age-related cognitive decline. Someone who listed himself as the primary account manager. Everly's finger traced down the page until she found the name. Jordan Michael Pierce. Everly, let me explain, Jordan began. Explain what? Her voice rose. Explain why your name is on an account in my mother's name, an account she never opened. I was trying to help her. Jordan's voice turned desperate. She needed assistance and I... Did I ask for help? I interjected softly. He ignored me, focusing on Everly. Your mother's been struggling. I thought if I set up a trust account, managed her money for her. With whose money? I asked. Jordan fell silent. I turned the page in the folder showing Everly the transfer records. 7 deposits, $6,000 each, May through November, $42,000 total. I was helping you, Jordan said. Paying for your care. Where did the money come from, Jordan? I asked, my voice still calm, still steady. Whose account did these transfers originate from? Everly was already reading ahead, her face growing paler. This says the money came from your personal account, Jordan. Your money. Yes, because I was taking care of your mother. But Mom never received it, Everly whispered. The bank statement shows she only got her pension and Social Security, nothing else. Because it went into the trust account I managed for her. Jordan's voice was rising now, defensive. That I never agreed to, I said. That I never knew about. Everly turned another page and I watched her read the expense report. Watched her face as she saw where the money had actually gone. $18,000, she read aloud, her voice shaking. Cascade Property Ventures. That's your office building, the one you bought last summer. That was a business investment, with my mother's money. Everly's voice broke. $4,500, Turquoise Travel Agency, 2 tickets to Nassau, Bahamas, first class. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. We went to the Bahamas in July, she whispered. You told me it was paid for with your bonus, from work. You said we could afford it because you'd done so well. I did well, Jordan protested. That investment is making money I was going to pay her back. With money you stole from her. Everly stood the papers scattering, while she turned to me, really seeing me for the first time in months, really seeing the worn clothes, the thin frame, the evidence of struggle I'd been hiding. Mom, you're heat. You're actually warm tonight, but on New Year's you were freezing. You were wearing 2 coats inside. The furnace was broken, I said quietly. I couldn't afford to fix it. Because he stole from you. Everly's voice was barely audible. While I was in the Bahamas drinking cocktails on the beach, you were here freezing, eating donated soup, and I didn't even know because I believed him when he said he was taking care of you. You couldn't have known, I said gently. He was very good at lying. I should have visited. She was crying openly now. I should have come here, should have seen, should have helped. Everly, please. Jordan reached for her. Let me explain everything. This is all a misunderstanding. She jerked away from him. Don't touch me. I love you. I did this for us, for our future. You did this for yourself, she screamed. You stole from my mother. You let her suffer while you bought property and took me on vacation with her money. There was a knock at the door, firm, authoritative. Everyone froze. I walked to the door and opened it. Robert Sullivan stood there, briefcase in hand. Behind him, Frank Wilson and Elizabeth Morgan. I'm sorry to interrupt, Robert said calmly, but there's something Everly needs to hear. Jordan's face drained of all color. What are you doing here? Robert walked to the table, set down his briefcase, and pulled out a small digital recorder. 3 nights ago, Robert said, Jordan called me at 11 p.m. He knew my wife has stage 3 breast cancer. He offered me $50,000 to lie about these documents. That's a lie, Jordan said quickly. I never... Robert pressed play. Jordan's voice filled my dining room, clear and unmistakable. Robert, let me be clear with you. You have 2 choices. Accept $50,000 in cash and you simply forget a few details about that subsidiary account. Everly's hands flew to her mouth. The recording continued, Jordan's voice growing harder, more threatening. You're replaceable. I have connections at North Star. You'll be fired by noon. Catherine needs that insurance, doesn't she? Stage 3 breast cancer isn't cheap. If you don't show up, your insurance will be canceled within 30 days. Catherine will have to figure out treatment without coverage. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Everly turned to Jordan, her face a mask of horror and betrayal. You threatened a man's wife, a woman with cancer. I was trying to protect us. Jordan's desperation was palpable now. He was giving your mother ideas, making her paranoid. She wasn't paranoid. Everly's voice was ice. She was right about everything. Honey, please, I love you. Get out, she said quietly. Everly, get out! Her scream echoed through the house. Get out of this house, get out of my life. Jordan looked around the room at me, at Robert, at Elizabeth and Frank standing witness. He knew he'd lost. The careful house of lies he'd built had collapsed, and there was nothing left but the truth of what he'd done. He grabbed his coat and walked to the door, turned back one last time. You'll regret this, he said, his voice cold. All of you. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him. Everly stood motionless in the center of my dining room, staring at the closed door. Then her legs gave out, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, sobbing. I knelt beside her, pulling her into my arms, the way I had when she was small. She clung to me, shaking. I'm so sorry, Mom, she cried. I'm so sorry I doubted you. I should have believed you. I should have known. Shh, I whispered, stroking her hair. You couldn't have known. He was very convincing. But you're my mother. I should have trusted you over him. I should have visited more, should have seen what was happening. You're here now, I said gently. That's what matters. Robert quietly began packing up his equipment. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Frank disappeared into the kitchen, giving us privacy. How could I marry someone like that? Everly whispered. How could I not see who he really was? Because you loved him, I said. And love makes us hopeful, makes us believe the best in people. He used that against me, against both of us. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. What do we do now? Elizabeth stepped forward. Now we make sure he faces consequences. I'm filing charges tomorrow, elder financial exploitation, fraud, witness, tampering, extortion. With the evidence we have, the recordings, the forged signature, Everly, your testimony about the Bahamas trip, about what he told you. She paused. He's going to prison. Good, Everly said, her voice hard. He deserves it. I'll need you to file for divorce, Elizabeth continued. Immediately. Protect your assets. Make it clear you had no knowledge of his crimes. I'm already planning to. Everly looked at me. Mom, I'm so sorry about the money. I'll pay you back every penny. That's not your responsibility, I said firmly. But I benefited from it. That vacation, the nice dinners, Her voice broke. I was living on stolen money and didn't even know it. You didn't know, I repeated. And now that you do, you're doing the right thing. That's what matters. Frank emerged from the kitchen with tea. Chamomile, he said gruffly. Helps with shock. Everly took the cup with shaking hands. Thank you, all of you. I don't know how to... you helped my mom when I should have been... Stop, Robert said gently. You're not responsible for your husband's choices. You're only responsible for your own. And right now you're making the right ones. We sat together for a long time, drinking tea, letting the evening settle. Elizabeth made phone calls to the FBI, to the district attorney's office, setting wheels in motion that would bring Jordan to justice. Around 10 p.m., Everly's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went white. It's Jordan. He's texting. She showed me the message. I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but I love you. Please don't throw away our marriage over a misunderstanding. We can work through this. Come home. Block his number, Elizabeth said immediately. Document that message first, screenshot it, then block him. No contact from this point forward. Everly nodded, her fingers moving across the screen. Another message came through before she could block him. You're making a huge mistake. I have lawyers too. If you do this, I'll make sure you regret it. I'll make sure everyone knows you were complicit. He's threatening you, I said quietly. Let him, Everly replied, her voice steady now. Let him try. I'll tell the truth. That's all I can do. She blocked the number. Where are you staying tonight? I asked. She looked around my small house. I don't want to go back to our place, but I don't want to impose. You're staying here, I said firmly. In your old room, for as long as you need. She started crying again, but these tears were different. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of healing. Thank you, Mom. 2 days later, FBI Special Agent Lisa Torres sat in my living room recording our statements. She was in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found immediately reassuring. Mrs. Brooks, she said, I want you to walk me through everything. Start from New Year's Eve. I did. For 2 hours, I told her every detail, the question about the Mustang, the bank investigation, Robert's evidence, the forged signature, the cognitive assessment, Jordan's phone call to me, his recorded threat to Robert, the dinner confrontation. She took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she looked at Everly. Mrs. Pierce, did you have any knowledge of your husband's activities? No, Everly said firmly. I believed him when he said he was helping my mom. I thought the Bahamas trip was paid for with his work bonus. I had no idea he was using money stolen from her. Agent Torres nodded. Based on what I'm hearing, we have grounds for federal charges. Wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, witness tampering, extortion. The recording of his call to Mr. Sullivan is particularly damaging. What happens now? I asked. We get an arrest warrant. Given the evidence and the flight risk, Mr. Pierce has means and motive to flee. I'd say we can move quickly. 72 hours, maybe less. He's already tried to run, Elizabeth interjected. My investigator found evidence he's been transferring money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Started 3 days ago. Agent Torres' eyes sharpened. How much? $67,000. A mix of his own money and what he had left from Mrs. Brooks's account. That seals it, Torres said. He's a flight risk. I'll have the warrant by tomorrow. She was right. 48 hours later, I was sitting at my kitchen table when Elizabeth called. Turn on the news, she said. Channel 8. I grabbed my remote, clicked to the local news station. The headline read, Portland real estate investor arrested on federal fraud charges. Jordan's face filled the screen, a photo from some charity gala smiling in a tuxedo. Then footage of him being led out of his office in handcuffs, FBI agents on either side. The reporter's voice, Jordan Pierce, 45, was arrested this morning at his downtown Portland office on multiple federal charges, including elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, and witness tampering. The FBI alleges Pierce stole more than $42,000 from his elderly mother-in-law while claiming to provide care for her. I watched, feeling nothing at first. Then slowly something like relief began to bloom in my chest. He'd been caught. The lies were over. Justice was beginning. 3 weeks later, I sat in Elizabeth's office for what felt like the 100th time preparing for trial. "The prosecution is strong," she said, reviewing her notes. "We have the forged signature, the bank records, the transfer receipts showing exactly where the money went. We have your cognitive assessment proving you're of sound mind. We have Robert's testimony about the threat. We have the recording." "What about Jordan's defense?" I asked. "His lawyer, Gerald Whitmore, expensive firm out of Seattle, is arguing it was a family misunderstanding, that Jordan was trying to help you manage your finances and you misinterpreted his intentions." She snorted. "It's weak. The evidence is overwhelming." "Will I have to testify?" "Yes, and it won't be easy. Whitmore will try to rattle you, suggest you're confused or vindictive, but we've prepared for that. You stay calm, stick to the facts, let the evidence speak." "What about Everly?" Elizabeth's expression softened. "She's agreed to testify. About the Bahamas trip, about what Jordan told her about her belief in his lies. Her testimony will be powerful because she has nothing to gain from it. She's divorcing him, refusing any settlement. She just wants the truth." I thought about my daughter living in my spare room for the past 3 weeks. Healing slowly, crying sometimes, but growing stronger every day. She'd filed for divorce, changed her name back to Brooke, started therapy. "How is she holding up?" Elizabeth asked, as if reading my mind. "Better. Not good, but better. She's angry at Jordan, at herself for not seeing the signs, but she's dealing with it." "Good, because the trial starts Monday, 6 days from now. Are you ready?" I thought about 7 months of cold, 7 months of hunger, 7 months of lies while Jordan smiled to my face and stole behind my back. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." Multnomah County Courthouse stood downtown, an imposing building of stone and glass. I climbed the steps with Everly on one side, Elizabeth on the other. News cameras clicked and flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Brooks, how do you feel about your son-in-law's arrest? Do you believe he'll be convicted? Everly, did you know about your husband's crimes?" Elizabeth pushed through them, saying nothing, her hand firm on my elbow. Inside the courthouse was all marble and echo. We took an elevator to the 4th floor, walked down a long corridor to courtroom 4B. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television. Wood-paneled walls, benches for observers, 2 tables facing the judge's bench. The Oregon state seal hung behind where justice would soon sit. I took my seat behind the prosecution table. Everly sat beside me, her hand finding mine. Robert and his wife Catherine were there, Catherine looking thin but determined, her cancer treatment ongoing but hopeful. Frank sat in the back, his presence solid and reassuring. Across the aisle, Jordan sat at the defense table with Gerald Whitmore. He looked diminished somehow despite his expensive suit. His shoulders hunched, his face pale. He glanced back once our eyes meeting. I saw no remorse there. Only anger, calculation, and something that might have been fear. I looked away. At 9 a.m. sharp, the bailiff stood. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Christine Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison entered a woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair and sharp, assessing eyes. She took her seat, surveyed the courtroom, and spoke. "Be seated." Everyone sat. Case number 24-CV-1847, the State of Oregon versus Jordan Michael Pierce. Charges include elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, forgery, witness tampering, and extortion. She looked at the prosecution table. "Ms. Morgan, you represent the plaintiff?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Whitmore, you represent the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Opening statements. Ms. Morgan, you may proceed." Elizabeth stood, buttoning her jacket. She walked to the center of the courtroom, her voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is about trust betrayed, about a man who saw vulnerability and chose to exploit it, about a son-in-law who stole from his own wife's mother while convincing everyone, including his wife, that he was being generous." She paused, letting the words settle. "Daisy Brooks is 68 years old, a retired math teacher, a widow, For 7 months, she lived in poverty wearing 2 coats indoors because her furnace was broken, eating donated soup because she couldn't afford groceries, rationing her medications because every dollar counted. Elizabeth's voice grew stronger. During those same 7 months, Jordan Pierce, using a forged signature and claims of Mrs. Brooks' supposed cognitive decline, transferred $42,000 into an account he controlled. He claimed this money was for her care, for a car he'd gifted her, for her well-being. She turned, pointing at Jordan. But the money never reached Mrs. Brooks. Instead, Jordan Pierce used it to buy real estate in his own name, to take luxury vacations, to join country clubs, to fund a lifestyle he could not otherwise afford. And when Mrs. Brooks began investigating, when she started asking questions, the defendant didn't apologize. He didn't return the money. He escalated. Elizabeth walked to her table, picked up a document. The evidence will show that Jordan Pierce threatened a witness, Robert Sullivan, offering him $50,000 in cash to recant his testimony. When Mr. Sullivan refused, the defendant threatened his employment and his wife's cancer treatment. All of this was recorded. She set down the document. The facts are clear. The law is clear. Jordan Pierce exploited an elderly woman's trust, forged her signature, stole her money, and attempted to obstruct justice. The evidence will prove every element of these crimes beyond reasonable doubt, and justice demands accountability. Elizabeth returned to her seat. Judge Morrison looked at the defense. Mr. Whitmore, your opening statement. Gerald Whitmore stood, a tall man in his 60s, expensive suit, graying hair. His voice was smooth, practiced. Your Honor, the prosecution would have you believe this is a simple case of theft, but family finances are never simple. Intentions are rarely clear, and misunderstandings, especially involving elderly family members, can— Objection, Elizabeth said. Counsel is characterizing the plaintiff as elderly in a way that implies incapacity. Mrs. Brooks has been certified as fully competent. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Whitmore, choose your words carefully. Whitmore nodded, adjusting. What I mean to say is that Jordan Pierce was attempting to help his mother-in-law. Mrs. Brooks had been resistant to assistance. Mr. Pierce believed in good faith that establishing a managed account would help her. Any confusion about authorization was unintentional. He walked toward the jury. The prosecution will present bank records, statements, receipts, but they cannot present proof of criminal intent. They cannot show that Jordan Pierce meant to harm Mrs. Brooks. Every action he took was motivated by concern, not greed. It was a weak argument, and I could see the jury wasn't buying it. Whitmore sat down. Ms. Morgan, Judge Morrison said, call your first witness. The prosecution calls Daisy Brooks. My heart pounded as I stood and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat facing the courtroom, facing Jordan. Elizabeth approached, her expression kind. Mrs. Brooks, please tell the court about New Year's Eve of this year. I took a breath and began to speak. The truth at last would be heard.